So today I want to talk a little bit about LLCs or limited liability companies, and I'm sure a lot of you know some information about them. They are established essentially to protect your personal assets. So if you have assets inside an LLC, those assets are subject to liability for anything that happens within that business. However, if something happens regarding that LLC business where those business assets can be attacked through some kind of a legal issue, your personal assets are protected because they are not part of the LLC. The LLC is viewed as a separate entity from you personally. So that's the main reason for setting up an LLC, is to protect you from certain liabilities. The other thing is sometimes you can view this as there are some tax benefits to the LLC as well. But let's look at this from a business perspective. Now, if you do something wrong personally, if you're working as a member of an LLC and you are negligent or grossly negligent, or you do something illegal, you're not protected from that. So just bear that in mind, that it's not like you're protected from all legal issues. You're not. If you do something that you know is wrong, and you're grossly negligent in performing your duties, you can be attacked personally. And there is case law that sets that standard that you can be personally liable. So just bear that in mind. So the first LLC was established in 1977 in Wyoming, and by 1996, all states had legislation that allowed LLCs. And it wasn't until 2003 that Massachusetts finally adopted legislation that allowed for single-member LLCs. Prior to that, it was just multi-member LLCs in Massachusetts. So now we've got LLCs set up, and everybody knows it's good to go. And sometimes you think back, wow, why did it take so long for all of these states to introduce legislation for LLCs? And there's a couple of answers to that. One is there was no case law testing the legality of an LLC, and a lot of states held back because they wanted to be sure that it was a legal entity. The other thing that threw the big monkey wrench into it was the IRS. Their inability to lay out rules regarding limited liability companies. They finally decided on how to tax LLCs in the late 90s. I believe it was 1997. They finally introduced some guidance on LLCs, and prior to that, they had issued some things, then withdrew it, then did private letter rulings. So there was a real concern over how are these things really going to be taxed. So now all of that's been resolved. Every state has capabilities of an LLC. Now what happens? So Delaware introduces something known as a series LLC. And what that is you have a parent LLC, and part of that parent LLC operating agreement, which is like the bylaws of a company. Within that operating agreement, it allows for having series LLCs. So the parent company must have an operating agreement that specifically lays out the fact that series LLCs are allowed within that structure. So basically you have the parent, and then you have what I would call the children underneath. Now each of these series LLCs can hold assets on their own, and based on the state legislation, that those assets are standalone companies so that anything happens, only those assets can be subject to any kind of a litigation. So the good thing too about this is that there is less paperwork. You formed your parent LLCs. There's much less paperwork to go through to have this series LLCs. And also you only need one federal identification number for the parent. Everything else falls underneath that parent. There's less paperwork to do for tax returns, less paperwork to do filing with the state. So the cost is diminished by having that kind of structure with a series LLC. So you have the capability of setting up all of these other LLCs as like the child of the parent. And it only takes one federal employer identification number for the parent to have all of these other LLCs. And the benefit of this, quite frankly, has a lot to do with the cost. You don't have to go through the cost of establishing a full-blown LLC within the state. Also, from a tax perspective, sometimes it's easier and less expensive if somebody's doing your taxes to have all of these under the parent. It's one federal identification number. You don't have to have separate tax forms for each one. That's where this series LLC comes into play. Now, there are only something like 14 states in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, 12 states, 12 or 13 states with Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico also allowing for series LLCs. So why doesn't everybody allow a series LLC structure? Well, let's go back to our original problem. One is the IRS, right? We know the IRS has ruled on LLCs, but the other is there is no case law to determine whether these are legal structures or not. So a lot of states are being conservative, very hesitant on allowing series LLCs to be established, and that's what's holding a lot of them up. So you had Delaware that started it. You've got other states like Illinois, Wisconsin, Utah, Alabama, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, Tennessee. I think I've covered them all, but I may have left something out. So those are the only states right now that allow series LLCs. But you know, until there's some case law on this, I think we're going to see other states not following suit. But I'm sure once somebody establishes case law, we will see other states open up to series LLCs. The other thing is maybe some of these states feel they need the revenue so that you'd have to establish a full-blown LLC for each LLC you need, which means you've got to file the paperwork, you got to pay the fee, you got to file for the annual report every year, and it can get very expensive if you have a number of LLCs. So hopefully this has helped people understand LLCs and series LLCs. It's a very interesting topic to me. And if there's more about this that comes to fruition in the next couple of years or months, certainly I'll be reporting on it again. But it's been my pleasure, and I hope you all have a great day, and thank you for listening and watching.